Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Caltech Public Programming and Michael Alexander, our program director, I welcome you to our new series, Movies That Matter. My name is Raul Espinosa. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your evening with us as we honor Black History Month with the special screening of the award-winning documentary, 100 Years from Mississippi. I'd like to invite Athena Castro to do our land acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, Raul. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Caltech. First and foremost, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional caretakers of the land on which Caltech is located, even though we are here virtually. Caltech is on the traditional lands of the Gabrielino Tongva people, who some identify as Kizh. In addition, we want to recognize their neighbors in the region, the Tataviam and Chumash people, who are also important cultural leaders in the region with the Gabrielino Tongva people. Thank you.
Thank you, Athena. I want to take a moment to thank our Caltech Public Programming supporters. That would be the Caltech Federal Credit Union, the Ralph H. Parsons Foundation, and the Friends of Beckman Auditorium, the Pasadena branch of the NAACP. For those of you that are visiting Caltech Public Programming for the first time, I invite you to learn more about us and our programs by visiting our website at events.caltech.edu, or you can just look over my left shoulder right there on the screen behind me. Now, I want to thank and briefly introduce our Movies That Matter Caltech partners who were really instrumental in helping us create this series. One of our partners is the Caltech Center for Inclusion and Diversity, or CCID. Please welcome its Program Manager for Advocacy and Campus Relations, Miss Monique Thomas. Hi, Monique.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Monique Thomas. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. As Raul said, I am the Program Manager for Advocacy and Campus Relations at the CCID. Under the incredible leadership of Dr. Lindsay Malcolm-Piku, who's our Chief Diversity Officer, and the CCID Director, Dr. Tashiana Bryant-Merrick, the CCID leads Caltech's efforts in creating a culture of inclusion, equity, diversity, and accessibility to all, or IDEA. We're committed to education, advocacy, allyship, and we achieve this through incredible collaborations and community partnerships.
Well, that's fantastic. And I just want, on behalf of Michael Alexander, thank you so much for your participation in making Movies That Matter happen. And we're excited about this launch with this film. Our other partner is the Caltech Y. So let's welcome its Executive Director, Athena Castro.
Hi, hello again. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here tonight. Since 1916, the Caltech Y has provided leadership opportunities that encourage Caltech students to be responsible citizens of the world. Guided by our 5 pillars of leadership, service, civic engagement, adventure, and perspective, our goal is to create programs where students learn to be effective citizen scientists and address the diverse issues that face us today on campus and in our local, national, and global communities, which is why we felt it was so important to participate in and support the Movies That Matter series. As we honor Black History Month, we want to not only do our part to advance and support diversity efforts both on campus and in our community, but to also center the stories and voices of people like Mamie Lang Kirkland, her family, and their friend John Hartfield, stories that really would be lost if not for the telling. Stories have power, and we see that in this movie as we experience these moments in history unfold through Mamie's eyes. So we are so honored to collaborate with our campus partners to bring everyone this powerful movie and discussion with our distinguished panelists. And before I turn it back to Raul, I just want to do a quick shout out to the Friends of the Caltech Y, the people who make Y programs possible. Thank you for your support. And thank you, Raul.
Well, you're welcome. And Monique, before I move on, is there anything else you want to say?
Well, just sort of in line with Athena, it was so important for the CCID to be a part of this work, particularly during Black History Month and this project. And Mrs. Kirkland, Mamie's story is so inspiring. One of the things that we work on with the CCID is about identity and really embracing the entire holistic identity. And for all of you, I'm still so blown away by this film. For those of you who saw it, there was a lot of pain and struggle, but there was so much joy. And I think that is what's important about the work that we do with CCID. One of the things that I loved in this film was Black joy and hope as an act of resistance. And that's the type of work that we promote, is doing the work, but finding the joy, because in that joy and in that hope and in that keep going forward is the resistance. And that's where the real work is. So thank you for letting us be a part of this. It's been an honor.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Athena, and thank you, Monique. And let's just get this party started, as they say. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to let the audience know we welcome your questions, and please use the Q&A function, and we'll get to as many of your questions as time permits. So without further ado, let me introduce our first guest, who's been developing 100 Years from Mississippi for the last several years. His background as a media artist, producer, and administrator includes 20 years in public radio with stations like KPFK in Los Angeles and KPFA in Berkeley. He is also an author, playwright, composer, and producer for numerous radio documentary projects and video industrials. He has worked in the cultural and social services sector as director of programs at A Place Called Home, managing director of Great Leap Incorporated, and managing director of the Black Theater Artists Workshop. He hails from Buffalo, New York, and resides in Los Angeles. Please welcome 100 Years from Mississippi writer, director, producer, and the last of Mamie Kirkland's 9 children, Tarabu Betserai Kirkland. Tarabu, welcome. We are so thrilled and honored to have you, and want to thank you so much on behalf of public programming for allowing us to view this film of yours.
Thank you. And thanks to Caltech, and in particular, Mr. Michael Alexander, for inviting us to screen the film here and share it with your audience. Unfortunately, our executive producer, Barry Shabaka Henley, who was scheduled to sit on the panel this evening, was not able to attend. So we'll carry on in his name.
Absolutely, and we'll thank him as well for allowing the film. Our next panelist, the NAACP Pasadena branch is celebrating its 102nd year. The branch was organized by John R. Wright Sr. and was granted a charter by the National Office of the NAACP on September 8th, 1919, becoming the 6th branch to be chartered. The Pasadena branch of the NAACP has evolved into a leading organization in the community, a dynamic force that continues to focus on local issues that include economic development, education, housing, legal redress, civil and human rights compliance to improve the quality of the life of its members and the general community. Please help me welcome the president of the NAACP Pasadena branch, Mr. Alan Edson. Alan, thank you for being with us this evening.
You're quite welcome. This is a pleasure and an honor. I do want to first thank Caltech and Michael Alexander for inviting me to participate. I also want to thank Tarabu for sharing his story of his mother with us. So many things came to mind, watching the film, and hopefully I get some moments to share those thoughts.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you for your support, helping us get the message out about this screening. All right, let's now introduce one of our own at Caltech. She joined Caltech's Division of the Humanities and Social Sciences as an assistant professor of history in 2019. She earned her PhD in history from Emory University in 2018, where she specialized in African American political history and urban political economy. Prior to joining Caltech Humanities and Social Sciences faculty, she spent a year as a visiting fellow at the University of Virginia's Jefferson Scholars Foundation. Please welcome Danielle L. Wiggins. Danielle, thank you for joining us, and we're agreeing to do this. And without further ado, I'm just handing it off to you.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Michael, for inviting me to participate in this conversation. So I was charged with getting this conversation started by sharing some of my thoughts and kind of responses to the film. And so I watched this film I watched it twice, and I watched it with 2 hats on kind of each time, or through 2 different lenses. One as a historian of African-American history, and then the other as just me, Danielle. And so as a historian, it was quite fascinating to watch a film about this period of crisis and struggle that historians call the nadir of African American history, the low point, at a moment that kind of feels like another kind of moment of crisis and struggle. So we see in this film the nadir, which was this period between the 1880s and 1920s in which Black political power was eroded through disenfranchisement. Economic power was weakened through the development of systems of debt peonage like sharecropping. And then, of course, Black efforts to gain social equality were thwarted by the codification of white supremacy through Jim Crow laws. And all of this, of course, was upheld by the constant threat of and the very real reality of racial violence, which was depicted in this film. And I think that the film really brilliantly revealed many of the parallels between the past and the present. But like during the first nadir, I think it's important to remember that we see today organized responses to these threats and incredible expressions of solidarity among groups that are being threatened once again by white supremacy. And I'm hoping that's something we can talk a little bit more about. And then I guess just that I had lots of thoughts as a historian and I can share more of them, but I will stop there. But as Danielle, I was just watching it and I really felt like I got to know Mamie Kirkland. It was quite amazing. Her sense of humor and just a sense of warmth really was captured so well. And I was really struck by how much she reminded me of some of my own family members. The depth of her memory reminded me of my grandfather, who until his very dying days could remember names of his elementary school classmates and every single gospel quartet that traveled through Central Florida. And even her handwriting looked like my grandmother's. It was like there was a generational kind of penmanship class. And I mentioned this when we talked earlier this week, but I also felt a sense of envy that you were able to spend so much time with your mother and that you were able to go on that healing journey with her and capture it on film. So I guess my first question for you is, what motivated you to start filming your mother? And then what motivated you to create this film? And what was kind of the process of putting it together?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Danielle. The motivation, as you saw, and obviously is very personal, but it goes back to hearing the story from my mother as a kid. She would tell the story of her father and this gentleman who escaped the lynching in Mississippi in 1915. Her father never returned, but his friend, John Hartfield, returned 4 years later to meet this horrible and tragic ending. But personally, I'd never seen anything documented. So there are questions in my mind, not whether it was true or not, but how much of it was fact and how much of it was folklore. But when I discovered this report by the Equal Justice Initiative out of Montgomery, Alabama, that was published in 2015, called Lynching in America, it was powerfully reaffirming, but incredibly devastating at the same time, because I saw with my own eyes this front page article of the Mississippi Daily News advertising this lynching. And so there's this thing called the inciting incident in dramatic storytelling, which is like the event that sets a main character or the main characters on a journey that occupy them throughout the narrative. And that article very much, for me, set the stage for this documentary. The process was arduous. I will not lie to you about that. But in terms of the structure of the story, I think the biggest hill we had to climb was figuring out how to tell this centuries worth of story that she had lived through. I mean, there were so many major movements of time. The Great Migration, which saw some 6 million African Americans leave the Deep South. Resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan beginning in the early 1900s. Jim Crow, segregation, and racial terrorism, which she experienced very personally. And then there was World War I, World War II, the stock market crash, the Great Depression. You know, it's just major domestic and international events that were part of the emotional fabric of her development. So it took us a while to get a perspective on this, but we realized we had to keep the story personal. And it may sound simple, but we had to distill all of these big ideas and these big moments of time down through her eyes. And we wanted to show her personal transformation and talk about her life lessons. But the process was also heartbreaking, because in going really deep into this history, what I discovered was that the actual facts of the event were even more horrible than the story I had been told as a kid. And what she realized, and what I realized, was that lynching didn't just victimize the people who were lynched. It victimized all people who had to be proximate to that reality, which included me 100 years later. And that creates a burden and a trauma. And I think many African Americans who lived through that era, and Alan can talk about this, I'm sure, and fled the Deep South, escaping racial terrorism, were forced not to talk about their burdens, not to share their burdens, because there wasn't a safe place to do that. In fact, in certain places, talking about it could get you killed. My grandfather, in fact, never spoke about it again for the rest of his life. And that's why, for me, I have such respect for the vigilance in the Jewish community to keep the story of the Holocaust alive, because I think it's an important act to continue to remind the world what we should never revisit again. And also just how fragile societies are, and the dangers of prejudice and discrimination and dehumanization of other human beings.
Yeah, I think that's a really kind of important observation about how racial violence worked, that it wasn't just victimizing the person who was victimized, but also was striking terror into the hearts of people that were also experiencing it. That it really must be understood as domestic terrorism, I think. But Alan, I was also curious kind of if you saw part of your life story in watching this film as well, or people that you knew, or stories that you heard growing up.
Well, I didn't really feel affinities towards me personally, but I think, you know, telling the stories are valuable. And I think all of us need to tell our stories. You know, I got a lot out of this story. You know, one of the things was her relationship with God. You know, living in all that trauma, I think she found solace in her relationship with God. And she referred to it many times during the film. And, you know, both my parents have passed. And there are things about them that I'm learning about now, where they're gone. And, you know, those are parts of me that I really didn't get the benefit from, you know, sharing them with my parents. And so for me, it's to encourage everybody to tell their story and, you know, really find out really who they are. And, you know, I got this in the movie. You know, Mrs. Kirkland, she was solid. But, you know, she was impacted with hate at 7 years old. And that was something she had to carry, you know, her whole life. And I think when she returned to Mississippi, you know, she was finally able to exhale and, you know, realize that it wasn't all bad. And so I think stories are valuable.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to capture these stories as well. When I was watching, it made me wish that I had got my mother on video, or my grandfather, or all of my grandparents. And so this is, I hope the people that are in the audience are encouraged to document and get those oral histories down, because those stories are really important. So kind of when I was watching, I kind of understood this as a film that explored kind of the depths of racial violence and kind of racial trauma. And there are a lot of really kind of troubling images and stories that you tell in this film. And I wondered if you could talk us through your decision and kind of thinking about the choice to include those images and to include those details of racial violence. And maybe for all of us to think about why it's important to be honest about the violence of white supremacy, even if that means being explicit and making people uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we get asked that question a lot, Danielle. Thank you. It's obviously devastating history. And, you know, our team had a lot of discussions about this. When we discovered the photographs, which were shared with us by the Equal Justice Initiative, it was, of course, shocking. You know, the images in themselves, but also that someone had methodically captured this violent murder as it was happening, as if it was a parade or a picnic. Then the further we dug into the story, we discovered this eyewitness account by a reporter who was sent to cover the story as a news event, because it was advertised in the state newspaper as an event and people were asked to come and participate in it. So we had that context. And then we had our internal discussions, which focused on whether or not introducing these images would actually re-traumatize an audience. But there were a few things that stood out for us. There was the fact that the images of John Hartfield had not been seen by anyone on our production team, even our archivists who had done tons of historical documentaries doing archival research. So unlike the Tulsa Massacre, which happened in 1921, where there have been multiple documentaries done on the subject, and the images have been seen many, many times, these images were unique and powerful in the sense that they hadn't been seen. The other issue was that these images were integral to her personal transformation and life lessons. They told the story of her journey, painfully, but very real. I mean, the Mississippi she grew up in was an apartheid state.
Yeah.
If you want to speak honestly, it was an apartheid state. Then lastly, we made a statement on our part. We felt that by showing these images, we were forcing the viewer to take a pause and really consider the humanity of the 31 million descendants of African slavery, and to really focus on everything that they were witnessing, all of the brutality, all of the horrors, all of the violence, but also our goal was to balance that with all of the resilience, all of the love, all of the joy, all of the capacity for forgiveness that she demonstrated. And that was that juxtaposition was really important for us. So that was some of what went into our thinking about showing the character and the depth of this racial animus.
Yeah, Alan, do you have kind of thoughts about why the whole truth is necessary to share?
Well, I think it shows the history of this country and how African Americans, Black people were treated. And, you know, I get to the story of John Hartfield. You know, I tried to, you know, picture myself in his place, you know, being hunted down for 5 days, no food and water. And for me, I left with the fact that he gave it all to live. And I think in any endeavor that we choose to live in our lives, we have to give it all. We're doing a disservice to ourselves and also to our gifts. And, you know, I can't say, you know, John Hartfield was my man, but, you know, his story really moved me. And, you know, just how brutally he was murdered.
You know, I want to add to that piece that Alan said, because, you know, I think, and your original question, Danielle, because I think the broader question is that one of the ways this country has tried to cope, I think, with this devastating history is by trying to deny it, by minimizing it. And I think that denial phenomenon has left many people of color, you know, burdened with this knowledge of the ugliness of this history, you know, the pain of it, but with no place to have it legitimated.
Yeah, I think I think about this quite a lot because I teach 20th century African American history, and I think about kind of the utility, I suppose, of showing these images. But I think for these are images and stories that I kind of grew up hearing as, you know, a Black person growing up in the United States. But for a lot of my students, they don't truly understand the violence of what happened and the violence of what of the racial terrorism that occurred. And I do think that because that story and that history is not kind of taught in schools, it's often not until college when they learn about Emmett Till and they see Emmett Till, which, you know, and I grew up hearing about Emmett Till. I think the majority of white Americans had never seen Emmett Till until Eyes on the Prize in 1986. So I do think it's important, and we can't kind of take for granted that people are aware of just the depth of what happened.
Yeah, I mean, really, how do you get past this legacy that's been created by the ideology of white supremacy and these narratives of racial difference until you talk about it? You know, because it's that legacy, that it's that same legacy that created slavery and sustained lynchings and perpetuated segregation. So in my mind, until we confront it, we're never going to be free. But, you know, right now, it appears in this country that we're actually doing the exact opposite, even trying to legislate the dialogue of these issues out of the educational curriculum.
Yes, we do seem to be in a moment. I feel like there was a resurgence of interest in African American history, particularly with the 1619 Project, and a real moment in which we were having these conversations about kind of the ways in which white supremacy is interwoven into all parts of our society. But there seems to be kind of a backward movement away from those honest conversations in the last couple of years. But I was thinking a lot about kind of truth and reconciliation commissions, because that was explored in the film as well. And just thinking about what it would mean to reckon with this history. And I was curious as to what you believe the first steps might be. And this is a question for you, Mr. Allen, as well as, or Mr. Edson, as well as someone that works with the Pasadena NAACP. But what are the first steps that we need to take, even on a local scale, to have these difficult conversations and to move forward?
I think, you know, we have to start having it. And, you know, it has to be in a safe situation where people feel comfortable sharing. You know, it has to be had. You know, it can bring up anger and, you know, a lot of pain that I don't think a lot of white people are ready for. And so that's what we're dealing with is, you know, we've kind of lived this truth, and you see how we've been held back because of it. And so, you know, my thing is, you know, people got to get out of our way, you know, because we got this beautiful thing that we can make happen in America, that America won't allow the beauty to happen. And so, you know, you kind of have to get your shots in, you know, one-on-one, I think, where the conversation is safe, and, you know, try to build on that. You know, I was just thinking of my family. They didn't want to talk about these type of stories. And so it hurt them because they held it all in, but it also helped me because I didn't know. And so we also have to be, you know, delicate. You know, I like to ask Tarabu, you know, how he really got his mother to open up. You know, because that was a real blessing. And, you know, I've had a grandmother that was living in South Carolina, and all she wanted to do was just get out. But that was the end of the conversation. And so, you know, we have to be open and, you know, be honest with ourselves, you know, because it's horrible. It's a horrible reality that we had to go through. And I still think we're suffering from the trauma. And I thought the point in the film when Ms. Kirkland was viewing some of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And she said, you know, what they're doing today is what I did, you know, 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we have to be honest that we're regressing as a society. And I think it's up to us to be bold enough to start the conversation, but also, you know, push forward.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, our thoughts and voices need to be heard. And, you know, so anytime I get a chance, you know, share.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Alan. Yeah, I agree, Daniel. You know, we can't just jump to the other side and have reconciliation until you have truth.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in denial of truth, it makes it very, very difficult. So, you know, for me, the best hope that we have is to teach history to those who will listen. And I think this film is part of that. Mm-hmm. And as you question, Alan, you know, there was a lot of resistance to the idea of going back to Mississippi in the film. And, you know, her famous line, which she said with attitude quite frequently, is that I don't want to see Mississippi on a map.
Yeah.
But, you know, the more the film began to take shape and the deeper my awareness became of the trauma that she had been personally carrying. You know, we know a lot more about trauma today than we did 100 years ago, you know. In fact, in international circles, we realize now that we're helping a refugee community. We have to deal with their trauma. Mm-hmm. We have to address their psychic burden, their emotional challenges. But we didn't do that for Black people in America who were fleeing racial terrorism. And so I saw up close and personal in her, as forgiving and as loving and as joyful as she was, she still, you know, carried that. But what I also saw was an authentic survivor story. Yeah. And one of the last survivors who could bear witness to this history. And so I was gently bearing down on that with her. You know, this is a part of a much larger story. And when she got introduced to the Equal Justice Initiative, you know, they unequivocally said to her, Mrs. Kirkland, you are the oldest living lynching survivor that we have ever spoken to. And that gave everybody pause. And I think it gave her pause too. And I think she began at that point to really start to see her story as part of the larger narrative. And that was the push, Alan, that I think really helped her. Okay, this is important. I need to go back and I need to do this. I need to close that circle. And it was a powerful piece for all of us to witness and to be a part of that.
You know, for me, you know, there are some subtleties that I picked up. You know, one was about her father. Mm-hmm. His father went to work to support his family. You know, nowadays, you know, there's no glee for a working Black man. Yeah. And, you know, so I found that piece to be very touching. And also when she talked about the style of her husband and how he dressed. You know, so there was, you know, a real thing going on with Black people then too. Mm-hmm. You know, above and beyond the oppression, you know, mm-hmm. people. And, you know, I like when your mother said, you know, I don't have a problem with white people. You know, they're people and I'm people. Mm-hmm. And so as we grow, we got to get that feeling, that sentiment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we have many questions. So I will toss it over to Raul to share some of the questions that have been coming in from the audience.
Thank you, Danielle.
Oh, absolutely. I just wish we had so much time because we have over 30 questions, but I'm going to encapsulate some of them because some of them are similar questions here. So let me start off with Tarabu. This is Dr. Shannon. What kind of feelings arose as you visited Mississippi with your mother? This was amazing. Thank you for giving us to giving this to us. Dr. Barbara Shannon.
Oh, thank you. Ooh. Well, our first inclination was to make sure that she was okay, my mother was okay, because we knew it was going to be extremely emotional for her. And it was. And I think for me, it was, it was healing, but it was also healing just knowing that we were able to facilitate her return back to Mississippi, and she was able to close that cycle for herself. We're literally talking about 100 years, and she could remember parts of the city because when we looked at photographs from a century earlier, the downtown of the city looked almost exactly like it did 100 years earlier. I mean, it was striking and eerily striking as so. It was really emotional on many, many levels. And so, yeah, it was just a powerful moment for all of us. And I'm really happy that we were able to capture some of it on film.
Excellent. Tarabu, here's another one from Donna LeBlanc. Thank you, Mr. Kirkland, for sharing your mother with the world. Langston Hughes is one of my favorites. My question is, how were the poems and other spoken words chosen for the film?
Oh, good question. And I think that goes back to what Alan was saying earlier, and what Monique said at the beginning of the introduction about, joy being part of the resistance in fighting this struggle. So, and the question that Danielle asked at the beginning about how do we come to sharing these images? So we wanted to balance that. And we had so many passages of time in the story. And we knew we couldn't just do it with a shot. And we didn't want to just do it in dialogue. I mean, if there's a choice where I can use an image instead of an actual dialogue or words, I will choose an image. But we came across this amazing idea that we started experimenting. First, we started with one poem. And then we realized it worked so well just to have, the actuality from James Baldwin and Langston Hughes and Richard Wright included in it. So we started doing it in each section of the film. And I think it just gave the film this kind of lyrical quality that captured the essence of that period in time so much deeper and beautifully than we could have done with trying to describe it. So we were excited, once it started, the concept started to work, we just went full bore on it.
That's excellent. So this next question is from Dacia Hayslip. I cried so much the first time, joy, sadness, a lot of both there. I turned right around and watched it as much as I could again before the Q&A. So my question is, what were some of the challenges that came with creating this feature, both emotionally and creative, or any other ways? Thanks again. Wonderful Friday night.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, like I said, I think for us, it was the balance. The late, great Bell Hooks said something that I just kept in my head as we were making the film. She said, sort of paraphrase, how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing, yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? Mm. So, we could throw image and horrific, images all the way through. I mean, we could have filled the whole film that way, but, that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to share it, but we also wanted to provoke a sense of humanity and possibility as well. Danielle talked about the 1619 Project, and I think about that a lot because it was such a brilliant analysis of the way in which this legacy has shaped our country. And then I think on the other hand, we have people who, like our former president, who said that it's a crusade against American history, that it was a campaign of, toxic propaganda. ideological poison, and you just realize how, you know, far we are apart in this conversation. But we must continue to teach. We must continue to hold truth. We must continue to, you know, confront, because, you know, that's the only way we're going to move the needle forward and get really to some sort of peace and honesty with this dialogue.
Actually, that's a perfect segue to the next question, which I'll actually pose for both Alan and Danielle. And the question is, what are our collective blind spots now? Danielle working with students and Alan working with the community.
Well, for me, it's the challenge. I tell people all the time that the action word in NAACP is advancement. And so, you know, how are we advancing? Is a good, healthy community part of that advancement? You know, yes, it is. What about employment? You know, so our communities need everything. And so I'm a relationship builder. And so tonight, you know, I have this beginning relationship with Caltech. And, you know, where do we go from here? But, you know, I need more help. You know, it's like putting holes in a dike. You know, I put 2 here and there's water running on the other side. And so, you know, our challenge is that I'm trying to build a whole community. And I need resources and, you know, people with good ideas on how to make that happen. And so, you know, African Americans want to do it. You know, we got the talent, the skills, we're on the sidelines. You know, my ability is getting to the game and see how we can advance.
Yeah, I would echo that and just say that solidarity is really important. I think issues that are often kind of framed as Black issues are really things that affect broad, big communities that are felt most intensely among African Americans. So I think by working to address racism and the particular ways in which African Americans are oppressed, other groups are helping themselves as well. That those kind of benefits will trickle across to everyone who's oppressed in a different way or to a different degree.
Thank you both. So these are comments that I just have to read. This one is from Joyce. Bravo! The Mamie Kirkland story was very touching and needs to be shared with everyone, especially young people. It shows how far America has come while there is still so far to go to end racism. That was from Joyce. This next comment is from Richard Darrell Nichols. It says, I had the pleasure and honor to meet Mrs. Kirkland at my church, St. Stephen Baptist Church in La Puente, California. Okay, let's go. This is from Stephanie R. Ironically, my paternal great-great-grandmother was lynched in Alabama in 1915. The family, my great-grandmother and their young children had to escape in the middle of the night, leave land, belongings, etc., or be killed too. Escape to a life of struggle while those who wanted his land got his land and probably still have it for their family. That's Stephanie R. Let me scroll down. These are amazing. I'm going to try to get to as many of them. At the beginning of the film, this is from Yiman Wang. At the beginning of the film, during the montage sequence, Mrs. Kirkland says she's seen many good things. The accompanying images show MLK Jr. and Josephine Baker. I was wondering if Mrs. Kirkland actually mentioned Josephine Baker and her movie-going experience in the Jim Crow area.
Well, you know, interestingly, Josephine Baker was in East St. Louis in 1917. the year of the East St. Louis so-called race riots. And that was the event that convinced her she wanted to leave America. My mother was there as well in 1917, so they both saw the same thing. So it was more than a metaphor to put that image in of her, because they both had that relationship, deep relationship with witnessing violence in East St. Louis in 1917.
My goodness. Thank you, Tarabu. Now, this is another comment from Richard Darrell Nichols. Thank you, excuse me, thank you for telling the story. This is how we keep telling our story, even if they don't want the story told in school. This is from Thomas Merlin. It says, what was the response to your trip by the people in the town of Mississippi?
Good question.
Well, first of all, it was a lot of curiosity. You know, we're in the middle of this very small town, and everybody knows everybody. So we were obviously not part of that crowd. And we got an opportunity to speak with the mayor of the city, who invited us into his office. We sat down, and he was very generous and very gracious. And so being the journalist that I am, I had to ask a couple questions. And I said, so what do you know about the incident that happened here 100 years ago with John Hartfield? And he bristled a little bit, and he says, well, I don't know anything about that. That was 100 years ago. I wasn't here, so I don't know anything about that. The next day, the New York Times reporter who had accompanied us on the trip went to interview the mayor separately. And the mayor knew everything about the incident. He was spilling his guts. He was like, I don't know why people come down here and want to talk about this. That was 100 years ago. And it was just so ironic that moment, because you could see, you know, this sort of attitude of, you know, sort of passively dismissing the past, but they really were very much aware of what had happened, but unwilling to talk about it, unwilling to discuss it. It was a very revealing moment. I wish I could have got him on camera saying that.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to read a few more comments and then ask the last question. I'm being told we're getting close to the end. And my goodness, there are so many questions. I wish we could get to all of them, but here are some of the comments. I was struck by Baron Stevenson's comment that the U.S. doesn't do shame well. I thought I was an informed person, but I only learned about the Tulsa Race Massacre in 2020. I was blown away. Now I've just learned about the East St. Louis race riots. Thank you for helping me be more informed, Nancy Anick. Beautiful and inspiring story to share. Thank you for your insight and creativity, Jean-Key Davis. And then let me to ask one last question, and then I'll toss it just for final commentary before we close out for the evening. Let's see. What do each of you think are the best things that people who want to be an ally can do? That's from Tasha Lowe Newsom. Let's start with Danielle.
That's a great question. I would say the first thing you should do is listen, and really kind of listen to understand rather than listening to try to fix. I'll keep it there.
Okay, great. Alan.
I think to be an ally, to be truly an ally, and not try to push your ideas on the issue, and be a learner.
Tarabu.
Oh, I think we should all be deeply concerned about these anti-history laws that are being passed around the country, because in fact, what they are attempting to do, in my opinion, is erase our memory. And we can never let that happen.
Gotcha. I'm being told we have time for a few more, so thank you. Let's see. Thank you for addressing the historical intergenerational trauma survivors and resilience through their faith. Those of us of a certain, that was Carol, Rick Ottolini. Those of us of a certain age remember the 1974 movie, The Autobiography of Jane Pittman. She was a fictional 100-year-old woman who experienced major events in Black history from emancipation to civil rights. Your grandmother is an amazing real-life woman who also experienced a century of major events.
My mother.
Yeah. Yeah. Your grandma. Oh, your mother. Yeah, she said grandmother, but it's his mother. Let's see. This is interesting. This is from Carol. It says Pasadena has an integrated school system, and how do we form relationships? Anyone want to take that question?
I think, participate in school board meetings.
Okay.
And if you really look at the Pasadena Unified School District, it's not as integrated as you would want to believe.
One last comment and then one last question. This is from Terry. She says, or he, I apologize. Grew up with my great-grandmother who was born in 1864. This film helped. Yeah. This film helped to affirm many of the things she shared with me as a child. Wish I'd realized how important this would come to be for me. Thank you for stepping forth. You know, let me just leave it there and just ask everyone on the panel here. I apologize, I got a little alert here. And on this panel here, if you just have some last words to leave our audiences with, and let me ask Alan to start first.
Well, it was a pleasure to be here tonight. And I hope people appreciated my remarks. And, this is the thing, we've got to keep moving. So this isn't the end. And so, think about what you're going to do tomorrow and next week. And, see if we can change this paradigm.
Thank you, Alan. Danielle, anything to leave our audiences with this evening?
Well, I'll just reiterate, get your family members on film, record their voices, record their stories, because there's just so much we can learn from how they survive the things that they survive. I think our times seem unprecedented, but in many ways they're not. And there are tools that can be passed down to us that can help us respond and to help us survive these times.
That's fantastic. Tarabu?
Yeah, I think the argument being presented around the country that if we teach a truer history that actually reflects what happened in this country, that will raise children not to love the country, is ridiculous. I think we need to teach the true history so they will understand how to put that in context and hopefully grow stronger and more compassionate as a result.
Now, before everybody leaves, I do want to thank you, Danielle, for leading this conversation. Thank you, Alan, for being willing to participate with our, panel discussion. And Tarabu, thank you for such a beautiful film.
Thank you. Thank you.
I also want to ask our audiences to please support this film by visiting their website, 100 Years from Mississippi, where you can buy and rent this film and share it with your friends. I also would like to invite you to join our mailing list so that we can continue to inform you about these kinds of films. And we also have other programs, not just these films, Behind the Book series, and some point down the future, we'll eventually get back to Caltech Live public performances. Also, before you sign off, there will be a series of cards rotating on your screen. You'll have the website address of the Pasadena NAACP, and as well as the Caltech Y. And I do want to again thank you, our panelists, and Monique and Athena. Thank you so much for helping us put together. And this is it, our first Movies That Matter. And for yes, and for everybody else, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night,
everyone.
Good night.
Tarabu, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Alan.
Pleasure.
Enjoy talking with you.
And Monique, I want to check out your center.
Yes, and I want to talk to you about connecting as well. Absolutely. I'm also, there's people on here, I'm also chair of the board of All Saints Church.
Oh, really?
So I really want to connect with you about some racial justice work there and at Caltech. So.
All right, you got a date.
Yeah, I'll be reaching out.
Excellent.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Appreciate you.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing your mom with us.
That's extraordinary.
Oh, I think we're still recording.
We are, and that's okay.
Okay.
We're,
Okay.
it's fun for them to hear. I can tell the conversation wants to continue. I do have to cut off because, we're over time at the moment.
We're over time. I was getting so many text messages to Tarabu of people saying how much they loved your mother, how much they loved the film, how much they cried and had joy. So yes, my phone is blowing up a little bit.
That's awesome. Thanks. That's awesome.
Yeah,
And thank you, Raul, for all the work you put into organizing this. It really was a kind of flawless presentation. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. And you know what, our fearless leader has signed in, and I wanted to thank Michael Alexander for the spark of this idea and bringing this film together.
Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for thinking about me.
Yeah.
This was cool.
All right, everybody. Good night.
Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.